Nobody remembers her name anymore. They said she was finished, broken beyond repair. The lights went out. The crowd moved on. Years of silence, years of pain. But while the world forgot her, she was rebuilding in the dark. Tonight wasn't supposed to happen. This moment wasn't part of the plan. And when she finally stepped back into the spotlight, everyone realized one thing, too late. She didn't just return, she returned stronger. But to understand the weight of that return, we have to go back to the moment the world decided she was obsolete. In the world of professional wrestling, memory is the shortest commodity. You are only as good as your last match, your last promo, your last viral clip. If you aren't on the screen, you don't exist. For Alina, the erasure wasn't slow. It was instantaneous. It happened on a Tuesday. It's not a pay-per-view, not a grand finale, but a meaningless exhibition match that nobody was supposed to remember. One bad landing, one mistimed step. The sound wasn't loud, just a dry snap, like a twig breaking in a winter forest. But the silence that followed was deafening. There is a specific kind of loneliness that happens when the paramedics come out. The show has to go on, so they clear you out like debris. As Alina was wheeled up the ramp, staring at the arena lights blurring into streaks of white, she saw the faces of the fans. They weren't crying. They were checking their phones. They were already speculating about who would take her spot on the roster. By the time she reached the hospital, the wrestling news cycles had already posted the headline, "Career-threatening injury." By the next morning, the headline changed to "Indefinite hiatus," and by the following month, there were no headlines at all. This is the brutal reality of the industry. The machine does not stop for broken gears. It simply replaces them. Her merchandise was quietly moved to the clearance section. Her locker nameplate was removed with a putty knife. The friends who promised to visit, they stopped texting after week 3. They were busy. They were on the road. They were surviving the same machine that just chewed Alina up. She spent the first 6 months sitting in a quiet room, watching the seasons change through a window. Physical pain was sharp, a constant reminder of what she had lost. But the psychological pain was a dull, heavy fog. She watched the shows on TV. She saw her former tag team partner, the one she had mentored, the one she had protected rising to the top. She saw her using Elena's moves. She saw her using Elena's catchphrases. It wasn't theft, it was just business. But to Alina, sitting in the dark, with a leg that wouldn't work, and a heart that felt hollow, it felt like she was watching her own ghost living the life she was supposed to have. The world hadn't just moved on, it had overwritten her. It was as if she had never stepped between those ropes at all. And perhaps that was the moment the old Alina died. The smiling champion who played by the rules, who shook hands, who trusted the system, she vanished in that silence. What remained was something harder, something colder. Something that realized that if she wanted to be remembered, she couldn't just ask for permission to return. She would have to force the world to look at her again. Rebuilding a human being is not like fixing a car. You don't just replace the parts and turn the key. You have to rebuild the spirit, and that is a process that happens in the shadows, far away from the pyro and the glitter. For 2 years, Alina became a ghost. She didn't go to the state-of-the-art performance center. She didn't hire the celebrity trainers who post selfies on Instagram. She found a rusted, forgotten boxing gym on the edge of the city. It smelled of old leather and sweat, the smell of desperation. The owner, an old man who had seen 1,000 fighters come and go, didn't ask who she was. He just pointed to the heavy bag and told her to pay in cash. The first day she tried to run the ropes, she collapsed. Her body, once a precision instrument, felt alien to her. The injury had healed technically, but the trust was gone. Every time she planted her foot, her brain screamed, "Stop!" It was a trauma response, a biological brake pedal slamming down to prevent pain. This is the part of the story the montages usually skip. They show the push-ups and the protein shakes. They don't show the nights she sat on the canvas, weeping out of sheer frustration because she couldn't execute a simple hip toss. They don't show the fear. But slowly, the fear began to transform. It turned into anger. She stopped watching the television shows. She stopped checking social media. She disconnected from the narrative the world was writing, the narrative that said she was a tragedy. What could have been? Instead, she focused on the rhythm. The sound of her boots on the wood. The thud of her forearm against the pads. She stripped away the flashy moves that had made her famous. She stopped trying to be the high flyer the fans loved. She became grounded. She adopted a style that was ugly, efficient, and brutal. If the world was going to hurt her, she would learn how to absorb it and redirect it. While she trained, the wrestling world continued to spin. Her former partner, now the queen of the division, was holding the championship belt for a record-breaking 400 days. The fans loved her. She was arrogant, untouchable, and claimed she had cleaned out the entire division. "There is no one left," the queen would say in interviews. "I have defeated the legends. I've defeated the rookies. I am the beginning and the end." Alina heard these words on the radio in the gym one rainy afternoon. She didn't throw a chair. She didn't scream. She just stopped skipping rope. She stood perfectly still, listening to the voice of the woman who had taken her spot. A strange calmness washed over her. It wasn't the desire for revenge. Revenge is hot and messy. This was clarity. She realized that the queen was soft. The champion had been fighting opponents who played by the rules, who wanted to be famous, who wanted to be liked. Alina didn't want to be liked anymore. She didn't care about the applause. She had learned to survive in the silence. She realized that her isolation hadn't been a punishment. It had been a forge. The fire had burned away everything unnecessary. She packed her bag. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror of the locker room. The face staring back wasn't the girl who smiled for the cameras 2 years ago. There were lines around her eyes. There was a hardness in her jaw. She looked tired, yes, but she also looked dangerous. She was no longer playing a character. She was simply herself. She was ready to introduce this new version to the world that had dared to forget her name. The event was the biggest of the year. It's a grand stage. 60,000 people packed into a stadium, screaming until their throats were raw. The main event had just concluded in a controversial fashion. The queen had retained her title, yet again, by barely lifting a finger. She stood in the center of the ring, bathed in gold light, holding a microphone. "I told you," the queen sneered, her voice echoing through the massive speakers. "There is nobody on this planet who can touch me. I am the ghostwriter of history. I am the only reality you have." The crowd booed, but it was a tired boo. They were resigned to it. They believed her. Who was left? Every challenger had been beaten. The narrative felt stagnant. The energy in the building was starting to dip as fans reached for their coats, expecting the show to end. Backstage, in the deepest shadow of the production area, a security guard nodded at a hooded figure. There was no entourage, no camera crew following her for a documentary, just Alina wearing black boots and a simple gray hoodie. She walked past the other wrestlers who were glued to the monitors. They didn't recognize her at first. She moved differently, now heavier, more deliberate. When she reached the gorilla position, the final curtain before the stage, the production manager looked at her with wide eyes. He had been given a cue sheet that simply said, "The interruption." He hadn't known who it was. He handed her a microphone. She didn't take it. She shook her head. She didn't need to speak. The stadium plunged into darkness. The confusion was immediate. Was it a technical glitch? A power failure? The murmur of 60,000 people is a terrifying sound, a low, rolling rumble of uncertainty. For 20 seconds, there was nothing. No music, no pyrotechnics, just the void. Then a sound. It wasn't a rock anthem. It wasn't a hip-hop beat. It was the sound of a heartbeat amplified 1,000 times. Thump-thump. Thump-thump. Slow, rhythmic, guttural. A single spotlight snapped on at the top of the ramp. Alina stepped into the light. She didn't pose. She didn't wave. She just stood there, head bowed, the hood obscuring her face. The crowd took a second to process. They squinted at the screens. Then the realization hit them like a physical wave. One person screamed her name, then 100, then 10,000. It wasn't a cheer of joy, it was a roar of disbelief. It was the sound of seeing a ghost. She pulled back her hood. The cameras zoomed in. Her eyes were locked on the ring, locked on the queen, whose smile had vanished, replaced by a look of genuine, unscripted horror. The queen dropped the microphone. It rolled across the canvas with a thud. Alina began to walk down the ramp. She didn't run. She walked with the terrifying patience of a predator that knows the prey has nowhere to go. The commentary team was screaming, losing their minds, but you couldn't hear them over the noise of the crowd. This wasn't just a return. This was an invasion. The atmosphere shifted from entertainment to something primal. The air became thick with tension. The fans weren't watching a show anymore. They were witnessing a reckoning. She slid under the bottom rope. She stood up. The two women stood nose to nose in the center of the ring. The history, the betrayal, the years of silence, it all hung in the air between them, heavier than any championship belt. There was no referee. The bell hadn't rung. This wasn't an official match, and yet it was the only fight that mattered. The Queen, usually so composed, struck first. It was a slap fast, disrespectful, designed to humiliate. It was the move of someone trying to assert dominance over a memory. Alina didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She slowly turned her head back to center, her expression unreadable. In the old days, Alina would have fired back with a flurry of punches. She would have played to the crowd. But this was the new Alina. She simply stepped forward, closing the distance, invading the Queen's personal space until the champion took an involuntary step back. That single step back told the entire story. The Queen was afraid. The brawl that followed wasn't pretty. It was ugly. It was a street fight. The Queen tried to use her speed, her flashy kicks, the moves that looked good on TikTok. Alina absorbed them. She took a boot to the face and just kept coming. It was like watching water crash against a rock. The water splashes, but the rock remains. Alina grabbed the Queen by the hair and threw her into the corner with a force that shook the ring posts. The crowd gasped. They had never seen her this aggressive. There was no showmanship in her movements, only efficiency. She dismantled the champion's defenses piece by piece. But the true turning point wasn't a physical move. It was a psychological one. The Queen, desperate and gasping for air, rolled out of the ring to grab her championship belt. She held it up like a shield, like a weapon. She screamed, "I built this place. You're nothing. You're the past." Alina stood in the center of the ring. She looked at the belt, then she looked at the Queen, and she laughed. It was a quiet, dry laugh. She signaled to the Queen, "Bring it." She didn't want the belt. She didn't care about the gold leather strap. She wanted the Queen to realize that the symbol of power meant nothing if the person holding it was broken inside. The Queen charged, swinging the belt. Alina ducked, fluid as water, and locked in a submission hold a sleeper choke. She dragged the champion down to the canvas. The arena went silent. The Queen flailed, her legs kicking, her hands clawing at Alina's arms. But Alina didn't let go. She leaned in, whispering something into the champion's ear that the cameras couldn't pick up. The Queen's eyes went wide. She stopped fighting. She faded. Alina released the hold just before the Queen passed out. She stood up, looking down at the fallen monarch. The security guards were rushing the ring now, referees sliding in to restore order. The chaos was absolute. But in the center of the storm, Alina was perfectly still. She looked at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. The ghost in the gym, the lonely nights, the silence it had all led to this. She hadn't just beaten the champion. She had broken the aura of invincibility. She turned to leave. She didn't raise her arms in victory. She didn't pose on the turnbuckle. She simply stepped through the ropes and walked up the ramp, leaving the Queen gasping for air, clutching a belt that suddenly seemed very heavy and very worthless. The viral clips hit the internet before Alina even made it to the locker room. The return, the Empress is back. Shocking moment. The views were in the millions. The world that had forgotten her name was now screaming it from every digital rooftop. But back in the locker room, the air was quiet. Alina sat on a bench, unwrapping the tape from her wrists. Her body ached, a familiar throb that told her she was alive. The door opened. It was the Queen. She wasn't holding her belt. She was icing her jaw. She stood in the doorway, stripped of her arrogance, looking like just another tired athlete. The rivalry, the hatred, the kayfabe, it all falls away when the cameras turn off. "You hit hard," the Queen said, her voice raspy. "You got soft," Alina replied, not looking up. The Queen walked in and sat on the bench opposite her. There was a long silence. "I thought you were done, Alina. I really did. When you left, the pressure, it was all on me. I had to carry the show. I had to become this ... monster. Just to keep people watching." Alina finally looked up. She saw the exhaustion in the Queen's eyes. It's the fear of irrelevance that drives every performer. And in that moment, the twist of the night revealed itself. Alina hadn't returned to destroy the queen. She had returned to save her. You were drowning, Alina said softly. Saw it in your eyes on TV. You were bored. You were complacent. You needed someone to remind you why we do this. Iron sharpens iron. The queen managed a weak smile. I'll consider me sharpened. Alina stood up and threw her tape into the trash can. I didn't come back for the title, Jade. I came back because I needed to know if I could. And you. You needed to know that you're not the only one left. This was the unseen consequence of the night. The fans thought they saw a war. They thought they saw a bitter rivalry reignited. But in reality, they saw two masters of their craft pushing each other to evolve. Alina walked out of the arena into the cool night air. A few fans were waiting by the barricades, holding old merchandise, the stuff that had been on clearance. They screamed her name. She stopped. For the first time in years, she smiled. Not the practiced smile of a media darling, but a real human smile. She had lost years of her career. She had lost her spot in the limelight. She had lost friends. But as she signed the autograph for a young girl holding an action figure, Alina realized she had gained something far more valuable. She had lost the fear of being forgotten. When you are no longer afraid of the dark, the spotlight doesn't blind you anymore. You control it. She didn't just return stronger. She returned whole.